just move back for a minute. I guess historically, 1970 and before, New Jersey really had one of the more respected newspapers in the country at that point.
With the Newark News?
The Newark News.
Yes.
Which I guess had been around, 80, 90 years?
I believe so, yeah.
So what happened with the Newark News? It was a very highly respected newspaper.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a little bit before my time, but I do recall there were two rather lengthy and bitter strikes, which I think had a lot to do with its demise. But I did a piece. I'm working with a professor at Rutgers who's writing a book about the history of New Jersey journalism, and I did some research for him. And it appears that the Newark News really made the wrong decision in that they stuck with an urban audience. They stayed in the city when population trends in New Jersey, the suburbs were growing. And if you look at what the Star Ledger did at the same time, and at that time the Star Ledger was not as highly regarded. And I think their circulation was probably less than the Newark News, but they decided to do more coverage of the suburbs. They moved some of their printing operations out there. And when you look at some of those numbers, as you said, from 33 to 19 newspapers, by and large, the newspapers that have survived have been the ones that have moved their operations and the focus of their coverage to the suburbs. The ones that have stayed in the cities have had a tougher time.
How important is this trend? How important are newspapers in New Jersey? I mean, people can turn on the TV, the radio, get their news. Does it matter that we have fewer newspapers now?
I believe it does in New Jersey because, we're a state that does not have its own television station. We're largely served by New York to the north, Philadelphia to the south, so that newspapers are much more important in a state like New Jersey than they are elsewhere. So I think what happens with our daily newspapers has a direct impact on the citizens, on public policy.
I guess it's often the case, too, and you see this nationally, that newspapers will often cover stories or investigate stories that TV and radio don't have time or don't care to do. And they, in a sense, have the initiative on a lot of the issues. And then TV and radio might pick up from there.
Yes,
there might be an investigative report now, let's say in the Ledger, and sometimes they're very good ones.
Yes.
And then a New York TV station might pick up something on that and do a feature. But the newspapers play that role much more than TV and radio are going to do.
Yes, exactly, and that's some of the arguments that I've seen with when people talk about the new media and how the internet is going to take over news. There's not a great deal of original reporting being done in online news, and to a lesser extent in television and radio news. You're correct in that the stories usually break somewhere in a newspaper and then get picked up on, and probably reach a wider audience, through television.
But the bigger problem, and again, this is not just New Jersey, is that readership of newspapers is declining, particularly amongst young people.
Yes.
And how can we account for that?
Well, I think we account for it by the virtue that this is a generation that's growing up with the internet. I heard an interesting term recently, digital natives and digital immigrants, where I guess you and I would be digital immigrants in that we learn all this process, but now we have people who are digital natives who grew up with the internet as a household item. So obviously that's one of the reasons why the readership is down. And I think in order to maybe attract some of those people, and newspapers are doing it already, they have to re-examine the way they deliver the news. And most newspapers have a website in addition to their print version. But I think they have to look at the website almost as a different entity. I think the quick thing to do was, you're a newspaper, let's throw all our stories online onto a web page, but there's different dynamics with with reading a news story on the internet as opposed to reading a newspaper.
How is that different? Tell me about that.
Well, I think you want to push for more interactivity. It's hyperlinks in stories. It's reading a story, seeing either next to it or embedded in the story some related stories, or it's giving you the ability to look further into an issue if it's something you're interested in. If you read about a certain term or an organization, you can get right into that. I know video is becoming a big thing on newspapers' websites. Gannett's doing a lot of work in that area. I believe they're training a number of their editors and reporters to shoot video in addition to doing what traditionally has been what journalists do.
Mm-hmm. What about television in the state? You know, it's always been the case, or the criticism, that New Jersey just gets short shrift when it comes to television coverage. You know, like, you know, we've got Philadelphia on one side, New York on the other, and we really have very little in terms of native television media, and we suffer for it.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, if you look at what little coverage, you know, New Jersey gets, you know, say from the New York stations, it's almost as if, you know, they feel like, oh, we have to do our one New Jersey story a day, and, you know, typically you'll see they get as far over the bridge or through the tunnel as they need to be to get to their story. You don't see them going down to, you know, Monmouth County or places like that unless they really need to.
Nothing like a fire in Jersey City.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And I even remember when I worked in, you know, communications for the governor's office and other places, we always knew that if we wanted New York TV, you know, it was much better to stage an event in Bergen County or Hudson County than, you know, somewhere else in the state. There are options here. You know, there's New Jersey Network, which I believe does an excellent job for people who are interested in following
for those people
New Jersey
who watch
news.
it.
Right. Yeah. And we have News 12 New Jersey, which has now been around for a number of years, a 24-hour news station. So
for those people who watch it.
Right. That's the thing. And I think I'm not familiar with what the rating numbers are, but I'd, you know, be surprised if the rating numbers are anywhere close to what the New York and or Philadelphia networks are getting.
Yeah, and commercial television, as you said, is, you know, pretty much spins off the two major cities.
Yes.
You mentioned the State House in New Jersey. You worked out of the State House as a reporter, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You know, did you see, what about the relationship between the media, the press, and the government? I mean, I used to work down there, and, you know, it's very interesting because the press area is just so close to the legislature and the governor's office, and it's just easy to send a press release out, you know, and it just seems to me that the government, let me put it another way, it seems to me that the media can easily become too reliant on the government for information and news in that setting.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. I've done some work on a paper or proposal called the propaganda model. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was written by two professors back in 1988, where they talk about how the news really passes through 5 filters before it reaches the public. And one of them is what you were talking about. They call it a symbiotic relationship between government and the media. And if you think about the fact that news organizations need to produce the news as cost effectively as possible, so they're likely to put bureaus in places where they have easy access to news. And that works to the advantage of government. You know, I worked, I guess, on both sides of that hallway. I was a State House reporter, and a number of years later I came back and I was in the governor's press office. And, you know, as a reporter, you know, if you want to go to a press conference, all you have to do is go down a flight of steps. If you need a comment from somebody, you walk across the hallway. And if you're working in communications, in a situation like that, it's a tremendous advantage, as opposed to if you're a grassroots organization, you have, you know, 25 news organizations in one hallway that you can easily reach. And if you're trying to do the same thing in Montclair or Rutherford or Hamilton, you have to get people to come out of their offices to where you are.
I mean, it's a situation, I guess, in a way that encourages laziness.
Yes.
You're right there, you got some information, maybe check the information, maybe you don't.
Right.
I guess it also might produce a kind of uniformity